Record high gas prices, out of this world inflation, a very quickly approaching midterm election, and Chinese tariffs back in the news. Joining me right now, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold. He is here to break it all down for us this morning. Great to see you, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Jen.
Let's start with President Biden. A recent poll from the Wall Street Journal shows that 83% of Americans believe the economy is in terrible shape. Not surprising there, even with the president touting that this is the most robust economy in modern history. What are people most worried about right now when it comes to the economy? What are the biggest concerns that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it's three things: inflation, inflation, and inflation. Right now, inflation is just driving these economic news stories because even though, as President Biden pointed out, job numbers are strong, we're seeing strong job creation, we're seeing tight labor markets, that's pushing up wages. That's a good thing. Unfortunately, inflation is outstripping these wage gains. So even as people have a little bit more in their paychecks and good job security, they're seeing their paychecks stretch a lot shorter than they used to. They're not having as much money in their bank account after they pay their utility bills, their rent, go to the gas station. Of course, those dollars just aren't worth as much as they used to be.
Yeah, and Brandon, in a bid to try to slow some of this inflation, President Biden is poised to reverse the Trump-era tariffs on Chinese goods. Now, these hikes will give the Biden administration the effect they might see to ease inflation slightly, but critics say these tariffs were in place for a reason, to counteract the unfair trade policies from China. What's your thoughts about this?
Yeah, unfortunately, while these tariffs were put in place for good reason, to try to get China back in line, back with the world economy when it comes to intellectual property and so forth, they haven't worked. They haven't worked at all. China hasn't changed its tune at all. All we've seen is higher costs on U.S. consumers and U.S. manufacturers. That's always a bad thing, but it's particularly a bad thing at a time when we're seeing this record inflation. It's driving up costs for Americans. We should repeal these immediately. Doing so won't entirely solve our inflation problem, but it will help. It's part of the solution.
Yeah, and it is it kind of cuts both ways for the president as well, because United Steelworkers, one of the largest steelworker unions in the country, did file a comment with the U.S. trade representatives Monday appealing for the administration to keep those tariffs in place. The president obviously covets his relationships with labor unions and needs to try to keep some of those unions on his side. So could we see more of this, do you think? Could we see more unions possibly drift away now from the administration?
Maybe. I mean, this is a classic case of Washington, D.C. special interest politics. It's about putting the needs of a select few, in this case, labor unions, ahead of the nation at large. Sure, if you work in the steel industry or the aluminum industry, you have benefited from these tariffs, but anybody who works in an industry that uses steel and aluminum, so think people that help manufacture airplanes or automobiles, people in the construction industry, they have all suffered as a result of these tariffs, as well as their consumers who are both American citizens and customers of these companies abroad. It's hurt American competitiveness. It's hurt American workers.
All right, let's talk about taxes, your specialty over here. The Congressional Budget Office released some data that shows individual tax collections right now on pace to reach $2.6 trillion. That's with a T. That is up more than 9%. That would be a record high. Now, this is during a time of, as you mentioned, inflation. Why such a sharp increase in these tax collections? Is there anything we can do about this?
Yeah, Jan, it's a really interesting phenomenon. And in fact, so interesting and surprising that the Congressional Budget Office themselves said they're not quite sure why this is the case. But there are certainly a number of factors we can point to. One is the fact that we pumped trillions of dollars, about $6 trillion into the economy over the past 2.5 years. And while those funds weren't necessarily taxed directly, they certainly created a lot of economic activity that was eventually taxed. So that pushed up tax collection. We're also the real estate boom, with housing prices being so high. A lot of times that triggered capital gains taxes for people that were selling their houses. And the other thing is inflation. Inflation, like I said, has driven up wages. And that, while it's a good thing typically, also means that if you're earning more, you're paying more in taxes, and even in some cases being bumped into higher tax brackets.
Yeah, this is true. All right, Brandon Arnold, we appreciate you joining us this morning on the National Desk. Have a good one.